Okay, hello everybody, this is Antonio Wolf, continuing the Phenomenology Spirit, starting off on section 15. We skipped last week because, I'm a slave to the wage, as they say. But have some free time today. So, section 15. As for the content, sometimes the others certainly make it easy for themselves to have a wide range. They draw into their domain a mass of material, namely, material that is already familiar and well ordered, and by focusing chiefly on oddities and curiosities, they seem all the more to have in their possession everything else that knowledge has already dealt with in its way, and also to be in control of what is still in disarray. And so they seem to subject everything to the absolute idea, which thus seems to be cognized in everything and to have matured into an expanded science. But a closer inspection shows that this expansion has not come about through one and the same principle's spontaneous adoption of different shapes, but it is rather the shapeless repetition of one and the same principle, which is just externally applied to the different material and acquires a tedious semblance of diversity. The idea, which for itself is no doubt true, in fact always remains at its starting point, if the development consists in nothing more than such a repetition of the same formula. When the knowing subject parades this single immobile form around in whatever is at hand, when the material is dipped into the stagnant element from outside, this does not fulfill what is needed any better than arbitrary notions about the content. It is not, that is, the wealth of shapes surging up from itself and their self-determining differentiation. Rather, it is a monochromatic formalism that only arrives at the differentiation of the material because the material is already prepared and familiar. This is typical architectonic thinking or archetypal thinking, whatever you want to call it. Basically, the people the Buddhists are like, well, look, everything is dependent arising. And you're like, well, what about the dog? Well, it's dependent arising. What more about it? Well, what more is there to say? It's dependent arising. Everything's dependent arising. That's all there is to say. Parmenides, everything just is. For a materialist, you show them a brain. They're like, well, it's just matter and motion. And you're like, well, what about a thought? Well, it's just matter and motion. Well, what about my feelings? It's just matter and motion, man. There's nothing more to say. That's all there is. It's all the truth. Forget about anything else. This is kind of the default way that we think, even at the best of philosophy. This happens a lot. Kant is pretty great, I think, but he also does this a lot. Even Hegel does this. Part of why people find the lectures, quote-unquote, easier to read and understand, supposedly, is because Hegel engages a bit in architectonic thinking. And he'll say, well, here's the structure of the dialectical thing, here's the immediate, mediate, and whatever, and he'll structure things that way so that you can see that this structure applies. And that certainly makes it easier for you to go oh, I get where this is coming from, where it's going, as a core to this formal structure. You're in fact not really thinking, which is the problem with it. To give you an example, in Chapter 2 of The Science of Logic, Dasein, which Giovanni translated as existence, the way the first 5 movements there work are literally just architectonic. Existence is just a being with a non-being. Every time you have a being with a non-being, Jester, can you put yourself on push a talk? There's sound coming through. Thank you. Existence is just being with a non-being. So whenever you say, well, something is, you know that it exists. You know that then there's it is, and there's a non-being right next to it. And so you have existence. You're like, but there's this non-being next to it. And you have a determinate being as first this nothing within being. And then you have determinacy is, which means it exists, which means, here's the positive determinacy of being and the determinacy of non-being, which is reality and negation. And then you do the same with something. And something is the unity of reality and negation, but something is, therefore it exists, therefore there's the non-being right next to it, and that one is the other. And when you think about it that way, it's pretty easy. You catch on pretty quick, and like the movements do work. The problem is that that's not really what's explaining like what's going on. Uh, if all of Hegel worked that way, which if you're clever, you can actually get it to click that way for you. I mean, once somebody just gives you the stuff, it's actually pretty easy to do it. It's the difficulty is when somebody doesn't already give you the stuff to put into this form and tell you which one corresponds to which. Then it's hard because then you actually have to think. So, section 16. Yet this formalism presents this monotony and abstract universality as the absolute. It assures us that dissatisfaction with it is an incapacity to master the absolute standpoint and stick to it. Formerly, the empty possibility of representing something in another way was sufficient to refute an idea, and this bare possibility, the universal thought, also had the entire positive value of actual cognition. Here, too, we see all value ascribed to the universal idea in this form of non-actuality, and the dissolution of the distinct and determinate, or rather their banishment into the abyss of emptiness with no further development or intrinsic justification, presented as the speculative approach. To consider some existence as it is in the absolute just consists in saying of it, of course, we have spoken of it just now as if it were something, but in the absolute, the A equals A, there is nothing of the sort. In the absolute, everything is one. To pit this single insight, that in the absolute everything is the same, against discriminating and fulfilled cognition, or cognition seeking and demanding fulfillment, or to pass off it absolute as the night in which, as the saying goes, all cows are black. This is a naivete of emptiness of cognition. I appreciate that accented E right there. I do that as well, even though, I mean, the word exists in English and it doesn't use that accent, and people know how to pronounce it. The formalism that recent philosophy denounced and reviled revived in its very midst, and it will not disappear from science, though its inadequacy is familiar and felt, until the cognizing of absolute actuality has become entirely clear about its nature. A general idea, if it precedes the attempt to implement it, makes the implementation easier to follow. In consideration of this, it is useful to give a rough indication of it here, with the concomitant intention of taking the opportunity to eliminate some forms whose habitual acceptance is an obstacle for philosophical cognition. This is always commented on, so I'll comment on that too. The nights in which all cows are black was considered by Schelling himself to be a dig at him. Hegel told Schelling, no, it's not a dig at you, bro. It's a dig at your stupid followers. Schelling didn't buy that. I don't really know much about Schelling, but apparently, he must have said something that kind of went towards this. Not sure what. I read the book by White on Schelling. I think The Philosophy of Freedom is its title. I don't quite remember what the heck, which of his, well, I mean, it must have been like his first two systems that, like, because they were public. They were published around this time. That must have said something like this, but I don't remember reading anything in the overview of that book being so egregious as this, even though there are some things there that are quite egregious. So anyways, this ruined a whole friendship. Imagine that, you publish your first major work and kind of like ends one of the closest friendships you've had. Section 17. By the way, if you have any comments, you can either unmute and say something, or you can type on the side chat. Section 17. In my view, which must be justified only by the presentation of the system itself, everything depends on conceiving and expressing the true, not as substance, but just as much as subject. Hello, hello. Can people hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yep.
Okay. Just making sure. Let me read that again. So, in my view, which must be justified only by the presentation of the system itself, everything depends on conceiving and expressing the true not as substance, but just as much as subject. It's a famous phrase that a lot of people quote, or rather misquote, because they say it's we must, the absolute is not must not just be thought of substance, but also a subject, or that substance is. They particularly rephrase it into substance is subject, which is true, but it's not quite correct. And actually, through the rest of the preface, slowly the connections he builds up in the identities that he makes between some terms brings out what he means by this in a pretty clear way, in my view. So keep that in mind. At the same time, it should be noted that substantiality includes within itself the universal, or the immediacy of knowledge itself, as well as the immediacy that is being, or immediacy for knowledge. Okay, wait, that's weird. Let me read that. At the same time, it should be noted that substantiality includes within itself the universal, makes sense, or the immediacy of knowledge itself, all right, as well as the immediacy that is being, or immediacy for knowledge. Oh, okay. That being is what is known. It's being is that which is for knowledge, and he hasn't really explained it here. What he means by consciousness is knowledge, the structure of knowledge itself, the knower with the known. If the conception of God has the one substance shocked the age in which this definition was announced, he's referring there to Spinoza, saying, God is everything, God is with the one substance, and everything is in God. The reason for this was, on the one hand, the instinct that self-consciousness was only submerged in it and not preserved. On the other hand, the contrary, which clings to thinking as thinking, to universality as such, is the same simplicity or undifferentiated, immobile substantiality. And if, thirdly, thinking unites the being of substance with itself and conceives immediacy or intuition as thinking, then the question is still whether this intellectual intuition does not fall back again into inert simplicity and does not present actuality itself in a non-actual manner. If you don't know, what the reason Spinoza is saying, everything is in God, even though, you think about basic theology and God is the absolute, so yeah, there really can't be anything other than God, even though, if you get into, religious theology, that becomes a huge problem because, especially when Judaism and Christianity and Islam, they want to say, God is the absolute, but, everything depends on God. God does not depend on anything else, but the world is not like God. It's utterly unlike God. All finding things are utterly unlike God, and so, we can't say they have any essence shared with God. So saying that the world is part of God's substance is a no-no. Even though, logically, metaphysically, it's the only thing that could make sense to say. So, people just assume that Spinoza was not only committing heresy, but he was being an atheist, and because Spinoza didn't think that God was a person in any way that, in any way at all. He explicitly attacks this whole idea, which is more so against the Christian views of God, but not so against the high theological views, philosophical theological views of Judaism. You could look into that because that's actually very interesting. (18) The living substance is, moreover, being which is in truth subject, or what comes to the same thing, being which is in truth actual only insofar as it is the movement of self-positing, or is the mediation of becoming other to itself with itself. So this gives you an immediate little explanation as to what that means. So, being in truth which is its subject, or what comes to the same thing. Here it is. Here's Hegel's way of telling you, here is the rephrasing of a definition. To be a subject is being which is in truth actual only insofar as it is the movement of self-positing, or is the mediation of becoming other to itself with itself. I don't know. I hate that. For some reason, this PDF and this PDF alone does this weird thing that if I click in some very odd places, it will just jump to another page. I yet do not understand why. Anyways, okay. Like, think about this. Really think about this. If you slow down and you're like, hey, what is a subject? What is the common phrasing that people give to the subject-object distinction? Well, subjects do, a subject acts upon things or acts in general. An object is acted upon. It's just merely passive. Subject is active. So, a subject is being, which is in truth actual, only insofar as it is the movement of self-positing. It's probably a strange phrasing if you don't read much of this kind of philosophy, but positing and self-positing, it's position. Positing is putting something there. So a subject is a movement of putting itself there. Well, what do subjects do? What do we as subjects do? We're self-conscious. We put ourselves there. Even when you're not self-conscious, what are you doing? Well, you're putting yourself there. Even an amoeba, it goes and seeks out food. It does other things. It moves around. It's the one that's putting itself wherever it's going to do the things that it's doing. So it's self-positing. That's what a subject does. Or is the mediation of becoming other to itself, with itself. Now, this is the one that's kind of a bit weird. Certainly a lot hard to understand. Because what the hell does becoming other than what you are have to do with being a subject? Probably a simple way that you could see this is like, well, freedom is the freedom to change yourself. Change is a becoming other to what you are right now. Here it's not clear that the becoming other to itself is some kind of essential change or some kind of just, a slighter change. To spoil it, I suppose, the meaning of this is that a subject is the activity which produces itself as an object to itself. Your life process as a body, for example, is a subject and that it's producing itself as a body. It is an activity which becomes a physical substance. The activity of life produces the living body, and so it becomes other to itself that way. And yet the living body is also the very thing which maintains and produces the activity of life as well. So the object of the body also becomes subject in that way. As subject, substance is pure, simple negativity. There you go. Here's an identity. Subject equals simple negativity. And for this very reason, the bifurcation of the simple. That's a very odd word choice. It's just, the distinction difference of the simple. You don't just have a blob. You have a blob with parts. You have organs, parts. Or the opposing duplication, which is again the negation of this indifferent diversity and of its opposition. It is only this self-restoring equality or reflection into itself in otherness, and not an original unity as such, or immediate unity as such, that is the true. A very long sentence. So a subject is a simple negativity. Like, how does that make sense? Well, what do subjects do? They act. Well, what is an action? It's a change. It's a negation. Well, subjects act upon themselves. Their action itself is a negation because you're going from potential to actuality. You're doing something. The acting upon oneself is a change upon oneself. It's a negation of oneself. The act upon another is a negation of another. It's a change upon them. So subjects being simple negativity, or you could call this a pure negativity as well, makes perfectly good sense. It's a very abstract identification, but it's also true. And for this very reason, the bifurcation is simple. Difference. You add another thing to say about that is determinacy. You add a difference to it, a layer of difference that's not there before. Or you can do a radical negation, just destroy stuff. Or the opposing duplication, which is again the negation of this indifferent diversity and of its opposition. That is very odd phrasing, or the opposing duplication. Let me see what the Miller says. Phenomenology. Open. Recent documents. Miller, where is it? Ah, damn it. Whenever you're reading the translations in English and you come up on something that like just reads weird, always check all the different translations, because sometimes one of the other translations will like rephrase it in a much clearer way. Let's see, the substance is as subject, pure simple negativity. It's very reason the bifurcation is simple. It is the doubling which sets up opposition, and then again the negation of this indifferent diversity and of its antithesis. Okay, see, that's much clearer. So the subject is the doubling. It makes a difference. It doubles the thing by giving it a difference, makes it into two, which sets up an opposition within the thing itself. And then again, the negation of this indifferent diversity and of its antithesis. So then there's the bifurcation of the immediate simplicity and the complex of parts in the distinction. And then the subject is also the negation of that. So this is the absolute negation of the subject. But I mean, yeah, like again, like just look at that. Like the phrasing is huge, or the opposing duplication. Like that is just such a weird way to say it. Like so it is only self-restoring equality or reflection into itself in otherness. In the other, one is the other of the other, which is the other within, which is oneself. Somebody posted the pink card. I also have the pink card one. I generally refuse to look at the pink card one because I tried to read it back when it first came out, and I was reading it with somebody, a professor. I was trying to show how to read this stuff to, and we started with the Cambridge translation of Phenomenology, and it was just the worst thing in the world. Some of the passages just had like such a very weird, clunky English. So the pink card says, as subject it is pure, simple negativity, and as a result it is the estrangement of what is simple, or it is a doubling which posits oppositions, and which is again negation of this indifferent diversity in its opposition. That is, it is only this restoring sameness, the reflective turn into itself and its otherness. Well, that's not bad. That's actually that's as good as the Miller one. But like this one is, the Oxford one has just that opposing duplication. It's just weird. So it is only a self-restoring equality, again, negation, reflection into itself in otherness, not an original unity as such or immediate unity as such. That is the truth. So original here is the beginning, the origin, the first unity, or the immediate unity. The immediate would be just, like, he gives examples. He says, like you say, God, God is what? Once you say, well, God is good, God is true, God is just, blah, 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 then God is the immediate unity, the original unity, as he's saying here. But that's not all God is. God is just, God is good, God is power, God is all blah, blah. It's once you get all the predicates of God, what God is laid out, that what God actually is, that is the truth. It's still a unity, but it's not an immediate unity. It's a mediated unity, and particularly it's going to be a self-mediated unity. So continuing, the true is the becoming of itself, the circle that presupposes its end as its goal and has its end as its beginning and is only actual through implementation and its end. So that's just a simple description of the structure of method and results that we're going to get out of his philosophy. So, 19. Thus, the life of God in divine cognition may certainly be expressed as love's play with itself. This idea degenerates into edification and even insipidity if the seriousness, the pain, the patience, and labor of the negative are missing from it. In itself, this life is indeed serene equality and unity with itself, which has no serious concern with otherness and alienation, or with the overcoming of this alienation. But this in itself is the abstract universality in which the nature of this life, to be for itself, and thus in general the self-movement of the form, are ignored. If the form is said to be equal to the essence, then it is ipso facto a misunderstanding to suppose that cognition can be satisfied with the in itself or the essence, but can do without the form. That the absolute principle or the absolute intuition makes the completion of the former or the development of the latter superfluous. Just because the form is as essential to the essence as the essence is to itself, the essence is not to be conceived and expressed merely as essence, that is, as immediate substance or as pure self-intuition of the divine, but just as much as form and in the whole wealth of the developed form. Only in this way is it conceived and expressed as actuality. So again, the stuff about God, I mean, this is mainly just a critique of the dominant, and I mean, if you ever looked into theology, if you're an atheist, you probably don't care. You probably haven't. You probably should. It will make you a better. It will help you better understand what all these religious nut jobs are getting at, and what their high theology is really like dealing with as problems that you also need to deal with. So a lot of, well, pretty much all religions, barring some weird ones like, Buddhism and, some forms of Sanatana Dharma, what people call Hinduism, have a bias towards God as being and being alone. God only is. There is no non-being. There is no negativity in God. There is no such thing as negativity, properly speaking. And, these kind of ideas are what leads to, he says, degenerates into edification and even insipidity if the seriousness, the pain, and the patience, labor of the negative are missing from it. If you want to connect this to the theological views of life, it connects to the whole entire point. Hegel believes that the fall was necessary. The fall was not something that could or could not have happened. Likewise, the negativity of being is necessary. It's not just like, well, there could have been a universal world and we were just pure being and, there was only beings. No, like the world requires negation, it requires negativity. And therefore our thinking and our understanding also requires it. Continuing on, he says, but this in itself is the abstract universality in which the nature of this life to be for itself, and thus in general to be the self-movement of the form, are ignored. If the form is said to be equal to the essence, then it is ipso facto misunderstanding to suppose that cognition can be satisfied with the in itself, or the essence, but can do without the form. So collapsing the distinction doesn't get rid of the fact that the distinction is there, and we need to actually integrate it. Section 20. The true is the whole, but the whole is only the essence completing itself through its development. A famous phrase right there. Of the absolute, it must be said that it is essentially result, that only in the end is it what it is in truth, and precisely in this consists its nature, to be actual, subject, or becoming its own self. There we go, another little identity there. Actual equals subject equals becoming its own self. So a subject is that which becomes its own self, and to become one's own self, one must be able to be the originator of oneself as that which determines what oneself is. Though it may be seen contradictory that the absolute is to be conceived essentially as a result, a brief consideration clears up this semblance of contradiction. I mean, this should surprise you. I mean, if you probably hear all the time, well, Hegel is the philosopher of contradiction. Everything's contradictory. Why is he acting like contradiction is bad right here? Well, because there are some contradictions that are bad. If you're talking about the regular contradictions that people talk about, like, well, I am a genius, and in the sense that I am a genius, I am not a genius, or today is also not today. Those are stupid, and they're also wrong. Yes, somebody have a comment? Okay, sorry. The contradictions that Hegel deals with are very specific. They're internal oppositions. So the beginning, the principle, or the absolute, as it is initially and immediately expressed, is only the universal. A description of the process. We have universal, particular, individual, immediate, mediate, self-mediate. If I say all animals, these words cannot amount to a zoology. It is equally obvious that such words as the divine, the absolute, the eternal, etc., do not express what is contained in them. And only such words do, in fact, express the intuition as the immediate. You would think this is obvious, but talk to enough philosophy enthusiasts and even some philosophers, and you will realize, apparently, this is not obvious at all. Some people literally think that if you just say a word, you have explained what it is, and that it's obvious to anybody else what it is that you're talking about, and that you can just go ahead and use it in an everyday sense when you mean a very technical thing. So words with that happens a lot with one, God. Another is like reality, existence, in which people would just say these words, and you tell them, like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? What do I mean? Like, it's just everything is real. Okay, like, yeah, okay. So it applies to everything. But I'm asking you, what is that you mean that applies? And they can't tell you. They just, their brain goes kaput. So whatever is more than such a word, even just the transition to a proposition, contains a becoming other that must be taken back, is a mediation. So you say, let's take it this way, animals. So animals is just the immediate concept, the immediate universal. It's all-encompassing. Animals, what? Well, what is an animal? Just in saying the word animal, we don't know. We have to say an animal is X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. That's why he says whatever is more than such a word, even just a transition to a proposition. A proposition is a sentence, a proper sentence anyways. So, you say animals are X, Y, Z. That's a proposition. So even in that contains a becoming other that must be taken back. So the animal does not, the word animal, or the mere initial concept of animal, does not actually exhaust what it is. You have to expand it by saying animals are X, Y, Z, and the X, Y, and Z are understood to be folded right back. So he says a becoming other that must be taken back. So the animal is, it becomes the X, Y, and Z, which then are understood to belong to the animal, which is the taking back into the concept of animal of the X, Y, and Z, which is then a mediation, because then the real meaning of animal, the actual understanding, is animals X, animals are X, Y, and Z, which is a mediation. It's not an immediacy anymore. And that's the structure of all knowledge. That's the structure of all being. The structure of all comprehension, understanding, intelligibility. But it is mediation that inspires abhorrence, as if absolute cognition were abandoned when one makes more of mediation than just this, that it is nothing absolute, has no place in the absolute. And this is abhorrent only for people who are obsessed with, everything must be there in the beginning immediately. These are the kind of people who said, you can't, say anything about God. God is just, beyond all the predications that you make. If you truly understood, you would understand words make no difference, and that in fact all your understandings, whatever you understand by them, make no difference either. Probably a better way to say that is that whenever people think that they have the absolute, to say anything more, if you really believe that everything is matter, for example, and that, atoms, say you're an atomist, and everything's made of atoms, and there's only one kind of atom, and et cetera, et cetera. To say, well, the atom is X, Y, and Z is nonsensical. Now, the atom is not made of anything else. It cannot be analyzed further into parts. Everything else is made of atoms, but the atom is not made of anything else. So the atom just is. It is the pure immediacy. It is the absolute. It cannot be broken down, made soluble any further by anything or into anything. So when you view the world as everything is matter, everything is mind, everything is self-conscious, and then somebody says, well, what is that made of? And they go and they go ahead and try to tell you that, and say, the absolute must be X, Y, and Z to give it parts or details to it. That itself is a contradiction, because the absolute is, in this view, that Hegel's attacking, which is the common view, the absolute is treated as it's supposed to be the thing that everything else is made out of. How can you analyze it and give it further detail? It makes no sense. Section 21. But this abhorrence in fact stems from unfamiliarity with the nature of mediation and of absolute cognition itself. For mediation is nothing other than self-moving equality to itself, or it is reflection into itself, the moment of the I that is for itself pure negativity, or reduced to its pure abstraction, simple becoming. Here's another set of identifications. So mediation equals self-moving equality to itself, equals reflection into itself, equals the I that is for itself, self-conscious, equals pure negativity, equals simple or pure becoming. And I mean, like I said earlier, even if you don't have a background in philosophy and you don't know what these technical terms mean, these are mostly regular words. As a matter of fact, I think for all of them, they're regular words. They're not, words that you use all the time, but you use them. And even if you take the regular understanding and just view how he's associating it, and just view how he's using these associations, it starts to become clearer and clearer what this means in a pretty good detail.
But should you really jump from concept to concept just using the equivalency?
Yeah, I mean, why not? It makes sense.
I mean, it's kind of like a dumbed down, right?
Well, it's not exactly what he means, but it's also not what he means. Well, he's using these knowing that you don't know what these mean as a technicality already. He also knows that these words have certain connotations already, and he's doing it on purpose.
Oh.
So, like I said, even if you don't know any of the technical meanings, if you follow these associations and identifications he's using, and you just appeal to your own everyday understanding, these make perfectly good sense. Like, they're not unintelligible at all.
Okay. Hmm.
I don't know if you were here earlier for an earlier paragraph where he did something connected to this already, and I explained as like more details, like how these connect and why it makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think I was there, but I thought it was like philosophy. Usually, we don't equate with everyday things.
Not in this stuff. I mean, until Hegel tells you here's the technical meaning of it, which he never really does. uh, you're expected to take an everyday understanding. Like, how else are you supposed to read this? Like, I'll repeat what I said earlier about this. So he's saying, mediation. It's nothing other than self-moving equality to itself. So, what is mediation? Mediation is something in the middle. Well, what does being in the middle have? And mediation, particularly like in the form of mediating, like a mediator. If you've ever heard that term, it's kind of more of a legal term. People have mediations in court. They mediate with each other. They have mediators, people in between who represent. A lawyer mediates for you before the court, for example. So mediation is an action. So that's how you can connect it to self-moving. Actions move. Self-moving equality to itself. Okay, that's not obvious from the word mediation, but he's making the identity, so you'll take it for what it is. He says, or it is reflection into itself. Well, self-moving equality to itself. That's pretty straightforward. It's just not clear what it's connected to. And the reflection into itself. That's also pretty straightforward. Like, take it quite literally like a mirror reflection. Or, your internal reflection, which also, you say, I reflected upon, what I did today. Meaning you're having an imaginative, like, mirror reflection of what happened outside of you, now within you. So either way, the analogy works, or the metaphor. And then he says, this is the moment of the I that is for itself. Well, what is an I that is for itself? It's self-conscious. And all of a sudden, bam, here you go. It locks in. Self-conscious, reflection into itself. Perfect. Self-moving equality to itself. A subject that acts upon itself. Mediates itself. Self-conscious. There you go. There's your linchpin right there. Pure negativity. Well, okay. Well, what do subjects do? Subjects act. What is action? Action is change. What do subjects act? They act upon everything. They act upon themselves. They act upon others. They act upon ideas. They act upon the very general notion, the very general structure of what it is to be themselves. So a subject can negate anything, including their own life. You're capable of committing suicide or dying for honor or whatever, at will. Because that's what a subject is. That's what the self is.
But usually, when he says pure negativity, you think of the like simple nothing or being.
Yeah, you can think about it that way. I mean, that's also, but the nothingness of things. It's negativity here is an activity. I mean, yeah, you can treat it substantially, but like looking at the context, it doesn't make sense to treat it as a substantial form. It makes more sense to treat it as the activity of negating, or the process of negating. And then because right there, the last identity, he says, or reduced to its pure abstraction, simple becoming. What is becoming? It's a thing in constant change. It's just constant change, which is a constant negation, pure negativity. So all of these are bound up primarily by negativity. A mediation is negativity because it's a split. It's a negation of one thing with another. Self-moving equality to itself. An equality, well, one, self-motion is a negativity. Equality is itself a negativity. In order for a thing to be equal, there must be some kind of separation first to be equalized, so that you can say that a thing is equal in the first place. Reflections are
So
negative.
how does it go from like being for itself, which is a determinate thing, then to just simple becoming, which is, well, he says in the logic that it's not determinate. Right?
Well, that's not the right question. It's not how does he go from that. He's telling you that here. So he's not trying to prove to you that these things are related. And to ask, well, how does he prove it? Well, that's not what you should focus on here. What you should focus on here is what he say make sense? Can I make sense of what he has just said right here?
Oh, okay.
And I mean, I think I've shown you that. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. You got to slow down and think, but even with regular language, you can make sense of this. Regular, everyday understanding. So because of its simplicity, the I, or becoming in general, here is the one. So now he's directly one-to-one. The I is becoming in general. This mediating is precisely immediacy in the course of becoming and the immediate itself. So whatever he means by immediate, it's not immediacy in the way that we normally think about it. Because now he's saying, like, look, the immediacy is going to be a dynamic one. Oh, jeez. Where was I? There we go. So it's mediating. It's precisely immediacy in the course of becoming. So it's a result. It's very odd of phrasing. What it means is that it's the immediacy due to becoming as the result of becoming, which is the immediate itself. So becoming, the process of mediation, self-moving equality with itself, reflection itself, that is the actual immediate. It is, therefore, a misunderstanding of reason when reflection is excluded from the true and is not conceived as a positive moment of the absolute. And here that's wordplay. He means reflection both in the structure of things that are reflected against each other like a mirror, and reflection in the sense of thinking about things. So those who treat the truth as only being about substance, as only being about a thing, without treating it as a subject, as including and involving not only thought about it, but its own thought about itself. And here the absolute is key, because the absolute can only be one. So whatever the world is as absolute includes me, includes you, it includes thinking. We are the absolute's thinking about itself. So whatever we're doing, if we're going to know what the absolute actually is, we better know what role our own thinking is, because our own thinking exists. It is. We can't pretend that it's not. So it must play some role. It is playing a role. It is reflection that makes the true a result, but also sublates this opposition. Or reminder here. So even though the word sublation actually doesn't come up that much, I have personally changed it to upheaval. The simple reason for this that I'll give you, and you can go and look up my deeper reasons in the two little essays that I've written about it. Upheave has the natural connotation of cancellation. Something upheaved is something that's being disrupted, overturned. This does have it's made the jump to complete abstraction, which is good. Second, upheave is literally up and heave. A heave is a lift. The reason you say upheave is the same reason we say uplift. It's a lifting up to, so it's a heaving up to. And, It's in the word. It's an up. So if you're heaving up to, so you're going from a lower position to a higher position, that's the raising. And in the higher position, well, it's a qualitatively higher, and the thing has not been destroyed in being lifted. It has been preserved. So an uplift, uplifting somebody's spirit, uplifting a community, that sense of uplift, I'm just rolling right into upheave. Etymologically, it just works perfectly. The word is fit for it. So just keep in mind, upheave also means uplift, both things. There's your cancellation, raising, preservation. So I will say upheave instead of sublation. So it is reflection that makes the true a result, but also upheaves this opposition to its becoming. For this becoming is equally simple, and therefore does not differ from the form of the true, which consists in showing itself as simple in the result. It is rather just this having returned into simplicity. So this is one of the paragraphs, and he has actually multiple paragraphs in which he just kind of reiterates and redescribes the process of his thinking. Well, the process of the logic of which is the true logical concepts. So it is reflection, it is the making distinctions, the negations, that makes the true a result, but also upheaves this opposition to its becoming. For this becoming is equally simple, and therefore does not differ from the form of the true, which consists in showing itself as simple in the result. Is rather this just having returned into simplicity. That's a kind of a hard one, because then I just have to explain becoming. But while we're here, I suppose I might as well explain it. So you have a simple thing. You got being. This is being nothing. The being not becoming. Dialectic. So you got being. Being is the immediate. The first simple immediate. Well, in that we reflect on it, think about it, or think it, properly speaking, we also give it detail, or at least we try to give it detail. We don't just stick, well, being. We try to say, well, being is. In the being is, I mean, it's quite literally right there. Pay attention to it. The very English tells you. Being and is are the exact same thing. You're just saying, like, well, the being's being is another way to say it. So you have opposed being, you have reflected it in relationship to itself. But what being is not. There's no content. The regular name that we give to this is really just, it's a pure absence. It is, and in regular English, it's nothing. But I choose the word not, N-A-U-G-H-T, an archaic word by now, because it's immediate. Nothing is a compound. It's no thing, which indeed almost nobody ever pays attention to, including myself, until you get into philosophy. One day you read something by Heidegger and he's like, well, nothing is no thing. You're like, holy shit. It is. So even though for most people nothing is just an immediate word itself too, I prefer not, because it is actually an immediate word. Even though in its long lost etymology, well, it's not lost, but long past etymology, it once originated also as a compound meaning and word. So anyways, through reflection, we mediate being. We realize that it is not. Not is also reflected in that, not is. And so we distinguish not from being. But that makes not itself be, because not is. So you have the shift, being is not is being. That itself is one cycle. That whole cycle in which You go from one to the other, well, that's becoming. Becoming is the actual immediacy, because you can't really get more simple than becoming. Being is in fact becoming, not is in fact becoming. The simple is in fact this mediated result of becoming. That is the actual immediacy. You can't get more immediate than that. So, for this becoming is equally simple, and therefore does not differ from the form of the true, which consists in showing itself as simple in the result. And the simplicity he's appealing to here is not just that this is irreducible simplicity. It's the simplicity in which becoming ultimately all refers to itself. Well, if being and nothing, being and not here are simply expressions of becoming, or moments of becoming, as he calls them, they are just becoming relating it to itself. And so it's becoming's relation to becoming. It's becoming becomes becoming, which is just an immediate self-relation, which is simplicity. So he says it is rather just this having returned into simplicity. Somebody comments, Hegel makes a distinction between nothing, non-being, and negation, negativity. He is particular about these distinctions for what we commonly equate as synonyms. There are very technical distinctions for these. So, hopefully that makes sense. Continuing, though the embryo is indeed human in itself, it is not human for itself. It is human for itself only as cultivated reason, which has made itself into what it is in itself. Only this is its actuality, but this result is itself simple immediacy, for it is self-conscious freedom, which is at rest within itself and has not put opposition aside to leave it lying there, but is reconciled with it. Okay, that's a good example. So, usually you need to appreciate when Hegel gives you these kinds of little picture thoughts or examples, because he doesn't like to do it very often. I think this is not the first time he mentions the in itself, but also, if you want to find out what does the in itself mean, keep track of these identities or these example structures. Always in good philosophy, if things have not been explicitly defined yet, but they're being used, and you can tell they're being used in a technical sense, keep track of the associations that are being made. So, though the embryo is indeed human in itself, it is not human for itself. So the in itself here is what you would normally call the potential. The for itself here is the actual. It is human for itself only as cultivated reason. This is Hegel going along with the long-standing and true prejudice that to be human is to be a rational being, which has made itself into what it is in itself. Meaning, how do you become reasonable? Well, you got to work at being reasonable. You just aren't born reasonable. You have to not only be educated, you have to educate yourself. There's plenty of morons that go and get masters and PhDs at universities, and they're rather unreasonable people who don't live in the actual world as far as thinking goes. They haven't made themselves fully rational. They only have the semblance of being rational. They have the potential to be rational, but since they haven't done the work for themselves in self-education, autodidactism, we cannot say that they are human for themselves, that they're only human in themselves. Sounds pretty awful, pretty brutal, but it's just the facts. It's the reality. Can't do anything about that. Hegel says some pretty pretty metal things down the line, especially somewhere around chapter 4 in the famous Master Slave, which is more correctly called the Lord and Bondsman dialectic, where he says something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, that, that today in like modern societies we afford everybody the privilege and right of being treated at face as a person. But then Hegel says, but someone is only a person insofar as they have actually like struggled to prove themselves as a person. So, if people just respect you, on a superficial level, without you having done anything, that respect is merely a formality of respect in society. But, real respect, the real recognition that you are actually a person is until, you struggle and assert yourself to be that person against even their denials that you're a person. Do 22. Ah, man. Ooh. Well, here's another one. We've gone for an hour, so I don't know if you all good to go for another hour. Yes, no, say something in the comments.
I'm good to go.
Yeah.
All right. Here's another important one. So, what has been said can also be expressed by saying that reason is purposive activity. So, if you're wondering, what is reason? What does Hegel mean by reason? I don't know. It's so mysterious. Well, here's where you can start learning. So, he's telling you purposive activity. And if you tell me, I don't know what purposive activity is, and I don't know how you can even speak, speaking itself is purposive activity. The promotion of what is supposedly nature over misunderstood thinking, and above all the banishment of external purposiveness, has brought the form of purpose in general into disrepute. Still, in the way in which Aristotle, too, determines nature as purposive activity, purpose is the immediate, at rest, the unmoved, which is itself a mover. Thus, it is subject. Here you go. Here's the yet more associations. If you haven't done so up to now, on the first reading, I told you all, keep track of these identities, because there's a lot, and they actually are very helpful to you. And by that, you should have probably written them down together somewhere, because going back and like trying to keep highlights is probably very annoying. But you do you. But anyways, so we have reason's purposive activity. And purpose is the immediate, at rest, the unmoved, which is itself a mover. Thus, it is a subject. So, subject equals reason equals purposive activity. Which, I mean, that's a pretty natural association. In fact, if you're a subject, particularly a human subject, you're a subject insofar as you reason. We don't consider people who are irrational to be subjects. They are not acting in the capacity of a subject. We don't hold them responsible for anything. And indeed, in order to be reasonable, you have to be able to give an account as to why you're doing things. You got to give your purpose. If you can't give like anybody the purpose or the explanation of the purpose of what you are doing, nobody will accept that you're reasonable. That's why we don't accept that crazy people are reasonable. Their purposes make no sense. If they have purposes at all. Sometimes they don't have any purpose at all. Yeah, sometimes people just wilding out. So its power to move, taken abstractly, is being for itself or pure negativity. Here you go, another identity. So we already knew that the subject was pure negativity, but now we see that being for itself is a subject, which we get it for. So self-conscious we get, okay, the I, the subject is self-consciousness. Self-conscious is subject, which is pure negativity. The result is the same as the beginning only because the beginning is purpose. Or the actual is the same as its concept only because the immediate as purpose has the self or pure actuality within it. This may not seem to make much sense to you, but slow down, think about it. Okay, when you say, I begin, this can only ever make sense to anybody who hears this in the sense that it's the beginning of some end. The end being the purpose. You know, here I began my workday, meaning at some point the workday ends. It's for some end. Yes, we do have ideas, or rather more properly speaking, notions. And I don't mean that a notion, because in regular English, notion is kind of like a vague thing. Oh, I got a notion of that. In which, for example, in mathematics, people say, well, there are beginnings that don't end. You know, like the natural numbers begin at 1, but they have no ending. Therefore, you know, like that one doesn't count. No, you're right, that doesn't count, because those aren't properly beginnings of anything. Yeah, well, you can say that it's the first, but you can say that 1 is the first of the numbers, the natural numbers, but you can't say that 1 is the beginning of the numbers, because it doesn't really have a purposeful end towards anything. And if you do call it a beginning, it's only the beginning of the process, because the process is itself the end of the thing. So I'm still right, and you're still wrong. So a beginning with a purpose, or the actual is the same as its concept. So here, beginning is being identified also with concept. I forget if he's already mentioned that concept relates to the in itself, which I already related to the potential. So a concept is merely the beginning of a thing. Yeah, if we think about it objectively, the concept of an atom is merely the beginning, the incipience of the actual atom, the process of its becoming, not its completion. So the actual is the same as its concept only because the immediate as purpose has the self or pure actuality within itself. So the actual is the same as its concepts. So the actual being the purpose that is realized, which is the end. And if the concept is the beginning and the actual is the end is the same as its beginning only because the immediate as purpose has the self or pure actuality within itself. Now, why would that matter? Well, what is the self? Self is the negativity. It's the movement. So if you rephrase it to the end is the same as its beginning only because the immediate as the purpose, the end, has the self or the movement or pure actuality within itself. So the whole complex of becoming, which has being and not as its own endings, and of which becoming is the ending of the being and not. The beginning is the end. You know, you start with becoming, you end with becoming. You start with being, you end with being. You start with not, you end with not. You can go full circle. Why is that? Because each is a purpose, each is a beginning to themselves, but also an end to themselves. And each is nothing but the process of the self, the negation as a whole, which is immanent to them. The accomplished purpose, or the actual realized, is movement and unfolded becoming. But it is just this unrest that is the self. There you go. So, negation. And the self is equal to that immediacy and simplicity of the beginning because it is the result, that which has returned into itself. But that which has returned into itself is just the self, and the self is the equality and simplicity that relates itself to itself. If you know a little bit about Kierkegaard, in The Sickness Unto Death, he opens up with a sentence that mocks this, the relation of itself to itself. Actually, I'll read it to you right now because it's actually a very good one. It's actually true But all Kierkegaardians will go ahead and say, actually, it was just a joke. You know, he didn't really mean it. It was just like a lambasting and lampooning, you know, Hegelians. Well, I mean, it's a failure of lampooning because it's exactly what Hegel says, and it's true. Let me look at Kierkegaard. The self is the relation to itself, quote. Here it is. The self is a relation which relates itself to its own self, or it is that in the relation that the relation relates itself to its own self. The self is not the relation, but that the relation relates itself to its own self. Oh, sorry, somebody's asking to be let into the server. Let me see something. Okay, so got that fixed. Sorry about that. Somebody says, my favorite genre of Hegelian critique is when it's an unconscious affirmation of Hegel, very Deleuze-pilled. Yeah. Section 23. The need to represent the absolute as subject made use of the propositions God is the eternal, or the moral world order, or love, and so on. The moral world order is particularly referencing Fichte. Fichte has a great quote. I'll read it to you right now. I have it saved somewhere. Fichte, God is moral order quote. Let's see. Fichte stated, quote, the living and efficaciously acting moral order is itself God. We require no other God, nor can we grasp any other, end quote. And now you can tell why somebody might think that Fichte is an atheist and why he was charged for being an atheist when you say stuff like that. So in such propositions, the true is only posited directly as subject, not presented as the movement of reflecting itself into itself. So, you know, we only say it's a subject, but we haven't really shown its subjectivity in that. In a proposition of this kind, one begins with the word God. This by itself is a senseless sound, a mere name. Only the predicate says what God is his fulfillment and meaning. The empty beginning becomes actual knowledge only in this end. In view of this, it is hard to see why they do not speak merely of the eternal, of the moral world order, etc., or as the ancients did of pure concept, being, the one, etc., of that which is the meaning, without adding the senseless sound as well. Yeah, I mean, this is just like a... When by God, you don't really mean, you know, the person, the personal entity that cares about the world and does things, has plans. And you say, well, God is the universe, God is nature, God is the laws of physics, blah, blah, blah. God is doing no work there. God is just an empty name. You might as well just not use the word God. So, but it is just this word that indicates that what is posited is not a being or essence or universal in general. I don't even. That's odd. I hate that this thing jumps. That's a very weird choice. Like he capitalized being there. I wouldn't. Usually you capitalize the concept names when you're referring to the thing as such, like being as such. But here it's just a being. But it is just this word that indicates that what is posited is not a being or essence or universal in general, but something reflected into itself, a subject. Yet at the same time, this is only anticipated. The subject is assumed as a fixed point to which, as their support, the predicates are attached by means of a movement that belongs to the one with knowledge of this subject, and which is not considered to belong to the point itself. Yet it is only through this movement that the content would be presented as subject. Meaning... to prove that something is a subject, or to show that it is, properly speaking, is to let it do its own activity before you. You know, how do you know somebody's a subject? They tell you no. How do you know somebody's a real person? Eventually, they have their own mind. They have their own thoughts. And they will disagree with you on some things. And if you try to enforce your view upon them, they will resist. And they will give you a counter view of their own. But here, as far as the thought goes, this is the stupidity of a lot of atheists, in which they're like, well, what if I define God as a toaster, huh? What if I think God is actually a pineapple up in space? If one's view of how things are meant and what things mean is indeed that it's just whatever predicates you, the knower, decide to put upon them, you can say God is a toaster or God is a pineapple. But if by God there's an actual concept, an actual meaning to it of its own that is independent, you can't do that. If by God we mean the absolute, it cannot be a toaster because a toaster is finite. The absolute is infinite. And that cannot be a pineapple because the pineapple is finite. It's not infinite. It cannot be merely the totality of space because that is finite and God is infinite. So in that, we can see the subjectivity of the concept of God show itself because the meaning resists our external imposition. So given the way in which this movement is constituted, it cannot belong to the subject. Yet in accordance with the presupposition of this point, the movement too cannot be constituted otherwise. It can only be external. This anticipation that the absolute is subject is therefore not only not the actuality of this concept, it even makes this actuality impossible. For the anticipation posits the concept as a static point, while the actuality is self-movement. So there's the contradiction. If we just externally say God is a subject, the way we're treating the subject is merely as a static substance, which is exactly contradictory to the very idea of a subject in the first place. Hello, Treeman.
Hello.
All right, well, continuing the reading, section 24. Among various consequences that flow from what has been said, this one can be emphasized. Knowledge is only actual and can only be presented as science or as system. Furthermore, a so-called basic proposition or principle of philosophy, if it is true, is also false, just insofar as it is only a basic proposition or principle. So, given what we've worked up so far, given that he's told us, okay, we can't just say a name, we can't just say God and that counts as knowledge, it doesn't mean anything. In order to have it mean something, we have to expand it with predicates. God is X, Y, Z, or the animal is X, Y, Z. That is actual knowledge. But what is that? Well, that's a system. These are interrelated terms that are bound up within one self-identity. You expand the animal with the predicates. The animal is, X, Y, Z. Those predicates are folded right back into the animal. It's a differentiated unity, which is what? It's a system. It's a whole with parts. That's what a system etymologically means. It's a whole with parts. So knowledge, even the simple knowledge of a definition, a proposition, is a system. And what is a system? Well, a system is science. So this is not some like highfalutin thing like, oh, knowledge is only the system of the philosophical sciences that's, 2,000 pages long with the additions of like student notes and whatnot in lectures. No. Even just this simple proposition, an animal is X, Y, or Z, that is itself a system. And therefore it is a scientific statement. It is knowledge in that level. And I basically had that insight just now. I never thought about it that way there before. I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually the case.
That's a beautiful way that being and thought are mirroring each other, existing in the same structure, right?
Yeah. Being is a system, thought is a system, and being unfolds itself, develops itself. Thought unfolds and develops itself. So continuing, furthermore, a so-called basic proposition or principle of philosophy, if it is true, is also false, just insofar as it is only a basic proposition or principle. It is therefore easy to refute it. The refutation consists in pointing out its deficiency, and it is deficient because it is only the universal or principle, only the beginning. If the refutation is thorough, it is derived and developed from the principle itself, not effected from outside by affirmation and suggestion to the contrary. So the refutation would really be the development of the principle, and thus the repair of its deficiency. If it did not misunderstand itself by noticing only its negative activity, while remaining unconscious of its progress and result on the positive side. Whew. Even though this is probably, no, it's surely this is what this is a direct translation of the German. The speculative translation for that, for repair, would be fix. Because in English, fixing is both keeping a thing in place and also repairing it. So in the refutation of the false, we keep the false. It's there, it's in place. But we have also fixed it into its proper place within the whole. Think about that. Speculative English. So to do with development, and thus the repair of its deficiency, if it did not misunderstand itself by noticing only its negative activity while remaining unconscious of its progress and result in the positive side. The genuine positive realization of the beginning is at the same time, conversely, just as much a negative attitude towards it, viz. Towards the one-sided form in which it is only immediate or purpose. And so the realization can also be taken as a refutation of that which constitutes the basis of the system, but it is more correct to regard it as a demonstration that the basis or the principle of the system is in fact only its beginning. All right. This is you should probably know this down as Hegel explaining, what falsehood means to him. Falsehood is not pure abstract non-being that, is utterly worthless and without value. Falsehood is just an incomplete or deficient position. And refutation. I mean, the fact that, if you want to refute Hegel, here's what you got to do. You got to show Hegel that in what he's saying, in what he's doing, from that a problem itself arises, which will also reveal its own solution. You can't be like so many people who argue in philosophy generally, which is, I say being, you say being, but you're a Heideggerian, I'm a Hegelian, and you say that I'm wrong because being actually is what Heidegger says. But what Heidegger's talking about with being is not what Hegel's talking about with being. So we misunderstand words to be concepts, but they're not. Words signify concepts, and the concept that Heidegger's talking about with being is not the same concept that Hegel's talking about with being. So same word, different concept. And so a critique from one concept to another concept doesn't work. That's, comparing apples to toasters. Well, saying a toaster is bad because it doesn't make for a good apple. Well, of course, but it has nothing to do with it being a good toaster. $25. That the true is actual only as system, or that substance is essentially subject, is expressed in the representation which casts the absolute as spirit. The most sublime concept and the one that belongs to the modern age and its religion. The spiritual alone is the actual. It is the essence, or that which is in itself. The interrelating and determinate other being and being for itself. And what remains within itself in this determinacy, or in its being outside itself, or it is in and for itself. But it is this being in and for itself at first only for us, or in itself, or it is the spiritual substance. It must also be this for itself. It must be the knowledge of the spiritual and the knowledge of itself as spirit. That is, it must be as object to itself. But just as immediately an object sublated, upheaved, reflected into itself, it is for itself only for us, insofar as it is spiritual, as its spiritual content is generated by itself, by it itself. But insofar as it is for itself also for its own self, this self-generation, the pure concept, is at the same time the objective element in which it has its being there, and in this way it is, in its being there, its existence, for itself an object reflected into itself. The spirit that, so developed, knows itself a spirit, is science. Science is its actuality and the realm that it builds for itself in its own element. Failed myself there in translating on the fly. Well, substituting on the fly. It's because I'm hungry. I just got up right before I did the reading, and I skipped breakfast. Anyways, boy, this was a complex one. For those of you who don't know, spirit, the original German is Geist. It has a double meaning. It means both what we mean it's translated as ghost, as mind, and as spirit because it's contextually used to mean either of these. Here, Hegel means it as mind and spirit. It is generally going to be translated as spirit because spirit has the stronger connotations that are required. And saying mind and or spirit is just, too much of a mouthful. And it's not too hard for people to catch on. Okay, spirit is mind. The mind is a spiritual thing. Or rather, the mind is the pure spiritual thing. And why does he say that? Well, because we live in the modern times, or so we wish to believe. So they wished to believe back in his days. The modern time was a time of autonomy in which people wanted explanations for everything. I will not accept what you say unless you can explain it to me and give me substantive reasons for why I should accept it. And therefore, the most important thing in the modern world is the mind, spirit, reason. So the spiritual alone is the actual, it is the essence, or that which is in itself, the interrelating and determinate other being and being for itself. So what is spirit? What is mind? Well, whatever it is in itself. Well, that's very obvious. What is spiritual is something that's a self-internal reality. The mind is self-internal. Space out there is external. The interrelating and determinate. So Hegel's telling you whatever the mind is, spirit, it interrelates and it is determinate, so it's not vague. It is other being. That's kind of it is what it says. It's other being. It is other to itself, and it is being for itself. Being for itself, being self-conscious, the I. and what remains within itself in this determinacy or in its being outside itself. So even though it is other to itself, it is other being, it still remains within itself in this determination or determinacy of being other to itself or in its being outside itself. Or it is in and for itself. Now, I like Hegel and his writing and like a lot of the stuff he does with his stuff. This sentence, however, is just pretty terrible. He could have cut this out and nothing important would have been lost. But it is this being in and for itself, at first only for us or in itself, or it is the spiritual substance. So here in that, like, this is the phenomenology of spirit. Spirit is going to be our substance, the thing that we're going to be working with. At first, it is not a subject of its own self. It is not going to be operating on itself. It must also be this for itself. It must be the knowledge of the spiritual and the knowledge of itself as spirit. It must be an object for itself, but just as immediately an object upheaved, reflected into itself. So this is more a reference to what will happen at the end of the phenomenology of spirit. This will be the result. It is for itself only for us, here at the beginning, insofar as its spiritual content is generated by itself. So we know at the beginning that spirit is for itself, but spirit at the beginning, as being our object of cognition and operation, doesn't know this yet. So, it's like children. Think about it it's like children. We know that they are essentially truly rational beings meant to grow up and think for themselves and be independent, good, citizens of the world, let's say. But the child doesn't know that. We know that. We know that is the fact of what they are. And the child is that, but they don't know that yet. But they will be. Hopefully. Unless you're in the US, in which case our education system is terrible. Seems to be very bad at producing that final result. So it is for itself, the self-generation. It is for itself only for us, insofar as the spiritual content generated by itself. But insofar as it is for itself, also for its own self, this self-generation, the pure concept, is at the same time the objective element in which it has its being there, its existence. And in this way it is, in its existence, for itself, an object reflected into itself. So the existence here, its determinacy, is generated by its own independent concept. So we will follow along what it does. We won't do anything to it. The spirit that's so developed knows itself as spirit is science. Science is its actuality and the realm that it builds for itself in its own element. So the major chapters and sections of this book are called Forms of Consciousness. Consciousness here being con with scientiousness, which is scientia, which is science. So the word consciousness quite literally etymologically means with science, with knowledge. So spirit so developed to its final end is science. It is not with knowledge, it is knowledge itself. So it is science itself. And I also just had that insight right now. Let's see how long I've been going for. 1:30. 2:26. Oh god, that next one is gigantic. You know what? We'll just leave it here. We'll leave it at 26. Even though the thematic here of knowledge is going to continue, but I'm hungry. And well, I think this session has been actually a lot more fruitful than the last one. In the first 15 sections, there really wasn't that much to explain. There wasn't much that was technical. At least I don't consider most of what was there to have been anything difficult, and so I didn't really say much about it. But we had a lot more to think about in these 10 sections. Yeah, we probably could have made another 5 all the way to 30, just like last time. But why do that? Yeah, all right. Anybody got questions, comments on what we've read up to now?
Hey, yeah, I'm really appreciating these little talks here. I've not slogged through this text before. I've picked at it, and it's very helpful. I'm just wondering, with Hegel, has he ever anywhere leveraged a critique of physicalism in the kind of brand that we get it today, which is not really empiricism? It's more of like a reification of atomic physics. So yeah, just wondering about that.
Yes. Literally, it's in this book. It's in the section on reason. I think it's particularly observing reason, which deals with the scientistic worldview in general.
And so with the section on observing reason, is that where it's at?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Great. Thank you.
Somebody says, so he mentions that this idea of spirit belongs to modernity and it's religion. So he means we couldn't have understood the truth back in ancient Greece. Was spirit just dumb back then, or what? Just curious question. Yeah, self-consciousness is a big deal today. You go back to ancient philosophy, like there's no talk about consciousness, let alone self-consciousness. Like nobody was talking about those kinds of things. It wasn't important.
I don't know, in some ways, feels like Greek society is a little bit smarter than what we have now.
Well, they're intellectuals, and probably the average person was strangely a lot less stupid because they weren't confused by language in the way that we are today. But, as far as the average person goes, I don't think that they were that much better. With modernity, we are not just those people with, a shotgun, as opposed to a knife anymore. We know some things, and precisely because we've learned some things, we can also commit so much worse errors.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the role of empirical science? Like what you just said, like technology, basically.
Well, it's part of the development of humanity. There's some obvious stuff about it in which, it's the basic trial and error of improving things. That's there. That's natural. A lot of what science achieves, though, is not based on this progressive trial and error. We're trying to make the better plow or a better hoe. That's not how it works. A lot of the insights, people don't like to hear this, but it proved me wrong. It seems both today in the current insights that people get, like top-notch scientists, and in the past, the groundbreaking insights seem to be, quite frankly, supernatural. Like somebody just gets an idea out of the blue, for something that didn't exist in a way that people didn't understand before. It's not some progressive build-up to that thing. You need a progressive build-up for quite a lot of these things. But the progressive build-up then tapers off, and the qualitative discoveries of, the thing that builds on top of this progressive build-up to a whole new dimension, a whole new level. It's just kind of like a supernatural, random thing that happens. Einstein comes up with his theory because he has a crazy dream. Nikola Tesla just kind of like had the entire like vivid visions of like machines completely in front of him that he could like walk around and like imaginatively like tear apart and put back together, and then he built them in reality. The guys who discovered DNA like also just fucking got high and figured that out. A lot of scientific progress, it just seems, well, it's something else is feeding ideas into the human psyche whenever it feels like it, not when we feel like it.
Yeah, it's just like, well, it doesn't seem like relevant to philosophy, like whether we have toasters or not, like that.
Well, mechanical technology is not relevant directly because most of what philosophy will deal with is either like too abstract or like too concrete for machines to have anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is part of the understanding at some point that we ought to understand what is technology really, and what are we doing with it. Now, I don't think it's like technology is ultimately as metaphysically a big deal as like someone like Heidegger makes it. It is important because technology is becoming a destiny for us as far as the machines go. That if we misunderstand what technology really is, and we think that technology is being itself, we will destroy ourselves as humans. But that's a misunderstanding of what the purpose of technology and what the human being is. That's not really that, because technology itself reveals very much about what it is to essentially be human. It seems to me that like back in ancient Greece, people already like had a pretty good idea what the human actually is as human, and that the obsession with machines has just been people like ignoring what was found out, and not
So do you
ignoring
think,
it like actively ignoring. They're ignoring it because like they don't even know that it exists.
uh, so do you think like progress in technology has like made people less aware of the concept of being, I guess?
I think it's not just technology. Like I think Heidegger's wrong to say, "Oh, technology is the thing that's doing." No, it's not technology. It's capitalism. It's technology under a very specific social regime.
Yeah.
Any questions related to the reading? Okay, seems not. So I will end the recording here. Ah, man, I forgot. For those of you who made it this far, hit that like and that subscribe, comment, and gotta get some views on these. Gotta beat the Milwaukee Minotaur, Greg Sadler. As much as I think his half-hour Hegel like phenomenology spirit reading series is it's all right, but I would not recommend it to people for like really understanding the text in any significant way. I mean, understanding something is better than understanding nothing, by any measure. But if you're gonna understand something, I mean, you ought to understand it. I think at least to some of the level that what I'm exposing here, which I don't think is too difficult. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just like simple like, associative word play and regular thinking. But anyways, all right, that's it for the recording. See you next time. We'll start it with section 26.